For those who don't know me, my name is Aaron Baker. I am an animator at Sony Pictures Imageworks, and today we're going to be streaming a part 2 of our little acting animation. This is a collaboration that I've been doing with a friend. Hey, Joe Animates, thanks for joining us. Hope you're good, man. Cool. So yeah, this is a collaboration I've been doing with a friend. She's animating another character in the same shot as me. And essentially, what we're going to be doing is animating my character. And so you won't get the full context. But if you want to understand the context and all the planning that we've done, then you can check out the first part, which is at my YouTube channel. And it should still be open on Twitch. So if you want to see part 1, then you can see that on Twitch currently. But that will be only open for a couple of weeks. But anything that you want to catch up on will be on YouTube, which is in the links at the top here. So, yeah, you're not going to miss out on anything. So essentially what we're going to doing today is continuing from where we left off, which at this part, we are, at this moment in time, we are still in blocking. I just want to refine this a tiny little bit more, just tweak some of the spacing, make sure that we've got all that working. Then I'll probably do a couple of breakdowns, but at this point everything's kind of fleshed out, so it shouldn't be too difficult to continue. So yeah, what I'm going to be doing is just refining some in-betweens, and then we're going to hit spline and then bake it down on 2s, and I'll show you how I do that. It's a pretty simple method. But then the next part is where I start actually refining each curve, and we'll be looking more into like mechanically how the body is working from an anatomical and a creative perspective. And then yeah, that should give us something fun to work from. If there's anything that you have, if any questions you guys have as we go along, then don't hesitate to ask me, and yeah, we'll keep going. Yeah, it's gonna be quite daunting when you see everything baked on 2s, especially because this is like a 280 frame shot. So what we're looking at, I don't know how long that is, like 12 seconds. Yes, 11 seconds, around that mark. Hey Guy Nuka, thanks for the follow. Really great to see an audience. Looking forward to the stream. Thanks so much, freaking for the picker. Made sure I got it. Oh, that's really nice. Yeah, sorry, I forgot to actually put a link to the picker from previously. So I'll definitely make sure, yeah, I'll make sure that everyone gets that in case you're curious. What they're referring to here is the picker from Anim School, which is one that I made of Apollo. I'm assuming it was the Apollo one you were looking for. I do have a Ray one as well, which I can quickly open for you guys just so you see what it looks like. Just give me 1 second, I can quickly show you that, and then we'll actually dive into the shot. If there's any questions regarding animation, definitely hit me up about that in the chat, and I'll be happy to discuss things. I want to see kind of what intricate or difficult questions people can come up with in animation, and then hopefully, even though you may know the answer yourself, by me answering, or even you answering yourself, someone else is going to learn. So that's the main reason I ask for these challenges. Ask me the hardest questions you've got, and then we can start to break those down. So I'm quickly just going to find my rigs. The Ray one. Some people prefer more refined, smaller rigs, but I prefer the big pickers where I can actually see everything. Where is my Ray rig gone? He's disappeared. Oh, there he is. Boom. There we go. So now you can see. Yeah, it's quite a big picker. But in here, I've got all the eye controls. He's mostly a face rig, so all his face stuff is there. Hands, body. You get the gist of it. Yeah. So I guess we can start to dive in pretty soon. I'm just going to make sure I've got the chat up to my side in case we've got quite a lot of questions coming through already. Cool. Let me just turn down the music a bit so I can hear myself think. It's probably not that loud for you guys, but it's quite loud for me. Or I'll just knock it down on my headphones. Cool. We got some questions. Oh, thanks, Danish. I really appreciate that. That's really nice to hear. I'm glad you like the picker as well. I don't know how people got the picker. Maybe I sent it to someone else another time. I'm not sure. But I'll definitely put some links to that at some point. I'm sorry that I forgot last time. Someone needs to keep on poking me, just being like, Aaron, you didn't send that picker. Sorry, guys. Cool. So, hey Aaron, would you be able to go through a quick pose A to B analysis for noobs like myself? By way of saying analysis, do you mean to look at someone else's shot, or do you mean to actually break down a pose A to B in the shot that we've got here? Just so that's a clear question of what you would like to see from me. Awesome. By that I mean just show us which two keys are in your shots, pose A, pose B, break them down, overshoot, etc. Okay, yeah, I can definitely do that. We did a fair bit of that in part 1, but I'm going to be doing a little bit more of that today too, just to refine things, so I'll be going in all that as well. Sweet. So I guess we can start to dive in. What I can quickly show you is where we left off, just for those who haven't seen it before we start diving in too deep. Just give me one moment and I'll quickly grab that. Here we are. Let me just save this a new version of this shot before I start changing previous versions. And then, okay. So this is where we left off. Oh, it's just loading.
It'd be funny if we both got it wrong, eh? If I did the good thing and you did the bad one.
Ooh, sorry. My player just went a bit slow there.
No. Wouldn't be funny at all. No.
Seems like the audio's been delayed somehow.
No. Wouldn't be funny at all.
No, I think it's okay. I think it was just maybe my CPU's going a bit crazy. But yeah, it is in sync because I've checked in sync. But essentially, it's a very subtle piece, and most of the performance is delivered from the other character. So you're kind of seeing the blood, like only half the shot, from my end. But it will all make sense contextually when we publish the final thing. Cool. Just make sure I've got the chat there. All good. And make sure that doesn't minimize. That's good. Cool. Love the broad expression change. Thanks, man. Yeah, it's got a little bit of contrast in there. It's not too big, but it's enough to sell what we're looking for. I don't want to go too big. At the same time, like, that is his moment to shine. So I want to keep it in the natural realm, but also something that, you know, has a bit of contrast there. So I'm just going to make sure that everything in the rig is set up, because the pick is not bound right now. There we go. Cool. I think we're good to go. So Guy Nuka wanted to see just a breakdown in change. So there is already some in here. There's kind of like a breakdown here. So there's a hold in here, which eases in. And then there's a slight overshoot in here. So if you want to see kind of that in process, it's tricky because I don't want to really get rid of my frame. Essentially, what I would do is go through. I can show you some in-betweens because we're going to do that at the head of the shot here. So we're just going to have some ease-ins. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the entire rig, which you can see. So we just have this little ease out here, and I want to ease out even more just so it's not too slow as we ease out here. So it's going to be super subtle. It's super subtle. You can barely see it, honestly. but I maybe do want to lead slightly with the chest. So there's now what I've done is I've just broken up the chest a little bit, so the chest moves first, and then maybe we're just going to slightly drag the head. It's super subtle. What I'll do is I'll get a bit closer on the body, because we're not going to be really looking at the reference too much from at this point. We've mostly got all of our blocking done, and I don't want to get too blinded by the reference. And so if there's anything in there that I'm kind of questioning mechanically, then maybe I'll go back to my reference just to see what was happening, and maybe that will inspire me. If not, I'll just kind of keep on breaking down what we've already got here. But I wanted to have the reference there just so you guys can see how I'm using it. So we've got a little ease out there. There's a slight, it's very subtle, I don't know if you guys can see it, but there is a slight drag on the head. And then I'm going to grab the entire rig. And now we've got these two poses where it literally just settles back. And it's super subtle, but he does this little rocking motion. And so in here, I just want to add a breakdown. And I don't want it to feel, in terms of timing, I don't want it to feel too slow or fast. I don't want it to feel too even in its spacing. I still want to break it up where I can so that you actually feel the overlap in the body a little bit. So I'm going to exaggerate what my reference does. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a little bit of an ease out. But I'm going to have the head following through the action, so that it keeps on going around. Just a little bit. And then I want to favor with the chest. And then, again, adding some more keys. I want to essentially hold in, so we've got this rocking motion going left to right now. And I just want to hold in each left to right motion. I don't want to be holding in the middle, and I kind of just want to make sure that we have a spacing that favors either side. So now we're favoring in, and I might even begin to overshoot here. So we're going to add a little bit of overshoot. So what I mean by that is we're going to go into our curves in the graph editor, and here we can see we've got our Z action. And I want to make this feel heavier. I don't want to, essentially, to give something extra weight, you don't want to ease in to like essentially the less you ease in, the heavier it's going to feel, and then all of the weights gets absorbed after the impact. So if I was going to punch something, you don't want to have keys where essentially your impact, when you have your impact frame, you don't want to be easing into that impact frame. You only want to be easing out, and then bang, straight in on the next frame, and then you cushion in, and that's what gives it the impact. And so we want to get a little bit of that in here. Just even if it's subtle mechanics, I still want to make it feel like there's a little bit of weight in there. So if we look at these curves, can you see that that was starting to ease in a bit too much here, in between these three keys? And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to overshoot that slightly now. That way, it will just give it a little bit more weight. It's going to be subtle, but you'll probably feel it more than you'll see it. Because it's more in the motion. And I'm going to, this is literally what I'm going to be doing on twos, and you'll see kind of how I use this. But that's essentially what we're going to be doing. So there, can you see by overshooting the chest now, nothing feels too even, because even though I haven't touched the head, now the head is following through because we already overshot and held. Hey Took, how's it going? Toucan Parrot. Interesting names. To be fair, my alias name is pretty weird in games and stuff, so yeah, so now because we've had that impact in the chest, we're now getting already, so naturally we're getting follow through in the head, and I haven't had to overshoot the head. Cool. So now we're hanging into that key. So I don't want to add too much in here. Probably what I'll just do is add one extra breakdown, just so that we're favoring in. Oh no, my computer's being a little slow today. It's not usually this slow. I haven't got anything else open, so not sure what's going on there. Now I want to get a little bit of follow through in the chest. So I'm going to go into my curves again, and now I'm going to keep that chest overshooting. And that'll continue the motion round. And then similarly in here, you can see how it's starting to hold a bit too much. So I'm just going to keep that following through ever so slightly. And it should be in the Z2. Just a little bit more. And then we'll rock back into position. So now we get this little rocking motion. And I will be refining this more once we break it down on twos, but this is just my template, and then I'll actually be going... I do find at this point, when I'm adding these in-betweens, things aren't completely specific. And what I mean by that is when I'm thinking about how the body works anatomically and mechanically, I add in these things just to give me a template to work from. But then essentially what I do is I start on the roots in twos and I work my way outwards and I literally refine every curve. So that way I actually get exactly what I'm looking for and it's very specific. Whereas at this point, I just want to, it's like, imagine life drawing where, or even animating in 2D, where you draw in gestures and it's very broad strokes. And then afterwards you start to tie down the drawing when you get your in-betweens, and you know, if you want to make a key pose from a gesture drawing, that's when you start to tie it down. And that's essentially my method when it comes to mechanics, at least in acting. When it's more broad body mechanics, then I obviously tie those down as much as I can earlier. So happy to see the continuation of this. Thanks, Lucio. I really appreciate it, man. Thanks for joining us. Really love your work. They're just there for the idea, usually end up getting deleted or refined up later. Exactly. Deleted is a strong word. I think, yeah, definitely refined or altered in some way or another. If there's, I mean, I only delete things if something's really not working and I'm like, okay, back to the drawing board. Cool. So I'm going to try and be as efficient and as fast adding these breakdowns at this point. So I'm trying to explain as I go along, but I also kind of want to get onto the twos part because that's the main purpose of this part of the stream. So in here, he looks down. So there's a little beat in here where we're having the head change as he's rocking. So he's rocking left to right, and then he looks down as he's doing that, just to break up the motion a little bit. So in here, we still want to be easing out because we're going to be favoring the rocking, like I mentioned. We're going to be favoring the rocking left to right. But in here, I want to make sure that I punch the head down. So even though we're easing out, at this point, the head is actually going to lead down. And the eyes should definitely be the first thing that locks into place in that position. And then you can see the neck now naturally follow through the action. This is what I like about this method, is you start to get, by taking the key elements of your control. So say I want to lead with the head, but everything else has already still been like set in place by the templates. So when I'm using Tween Machine, by making one part of the action lead, all the parts in between. So say I want a separation between the head and the pelvis. Now, if I've already fleshed things out, then all I have to do is make sure that the pelvis is trailing back and that the head is leading, and everything in between kind of already has a natural follow through. So you kind of start to get more natural, free animation. And it's not really free because you've already set it up in the first place. But if you think actively in the long run, you start to get free stuff. I call it free because I'm not having to monitor it as much. Like all that template stuff that I mentioned earlier, it's kind of already it's already kind of there for you. Cool, so we keep going. I can add another in between here. I've got a slight delay. I've got like a 3 or 4 second delay on my computer. So whenever I shift when I'm going along keys, sometimes I overextend. But it's all good. So I'm just adding an in between in here. this is starting to feel a little linear as it settles back. So I want to favor on the chest in here. There we go. So I've actually brought that key essentially a bit earlier. And I want to be settling back into position. And then, so I've already made the root. Essentially, the root extended to his right, and now it's favoring back. But in order to keep that following through the action, I'm going to check my curves in the chest. And can you see here, they're starting to hit a wall. I'm just going to make sure that they keep following through that action a little bit. And similarly, up here. And then again in the head. So I'm checking all my curves, even though I'm in blocking. I'm still actively now, as I'm starting to add more in-betweens, I'm starting to look at the curves before I start splining. This is still in blocking, but I want to make sure that at least the core fundamentals of what I'm trying to achieve are there in my curves in blocking. So that when I start to spline it, I'm not having to go through and completely rework things. Even though you'll see, I'll start to add in new positions and then favor into those once I'm in blocking, like blocking plus. I guess I consider this blocking plus, to be honest. And I want to make sure, I'm just going to go in and actually do this manually. There you go. And I want to favor, I want to blend back a little bit. Just want to blend these slightly back. Sometimes I push things a little too far for what I'm looking for. And then again, in the upper chest, that feels like I've pushed that a bit too much. There you go. And then we're favoring back into this position. So that was like essentially the rocking motion now. So now we're favoring into our final position, making sure that we still follow through on the chest and the head a little bit. Keep favoring. So I think I'm just looking. So essentially we've got the first part blocked on like 4s currently. There's one bit in there where I'm holding for too long, so I'm probably going to take out a key. In here. So I'm going to grab this key. We're holding in this for too long. Grab all of this. Bring it back 4 frames. See, now I'll start to get a feel. And then essentially I'm going to take this key. So this was essentially my key pose. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go across, say like another 8 frames. And this is going to be my new key pose. And then what I'm going to do is go back. So this was frame 51 was initially my key pose, but now I'm going to keep easing in. So essentially I'm creating a moving hold and a new ease in out of my current key pose, if that makes sense. Because literally these 2 keys are the exact same, but I'm going to be easing in now. So I'm going to be altering my original key, and this is going to be my new key. So here, I'm going to keep favoring in now. So now can you see? We're now easing in still. But I'm going to be using these keys in here, to help break up and just get a little bit more follow through on the head. Can you see how the head kind of stops while the rest of it, like everything kind of stops at the same time? But I want to just get a natural moving hold to the head because he's kind of in this moment. He's not too fixated on something. He's kind of internally thinking anyway. So to have like a slightly slow moving hold, I think would actually help. Otherwise, if I keep him too still, he'll look too fixated. And it will look like he's looking at something in the water like, oh, what's that? So I kind of want to get these little eye darts where he's kind of, when I get into the polish of this, I'm going to add these little eye darts where it feels like he's internally thinking. It's like the subtext and like, well, the context of this moment at the head of the shot is that he's internally processing all the trauma, well, not trauma, but all the chaos they just went through. Essentially, they've come from like some big fight scene or something. We didn't go too specific because it's outside the shot, but just to give us a premise to follow. And so he's supposed to be like, we called this guy Watson. He's initially supposed to be like that. He did all the hard labor. And so he's kind of going to be more exhausted and he's kind of just processing and he's just like, I'm doing all the work here. And so that's essentially like the subtext. And so as we're going through, I just want to make sure that I get that internal thought process. So in here, I'm just going to keep... Now I'm going to ease in on Animbot, and I'm just getting these keys, and I'm going to be favoring in. Same here. Get the keys on the Z, favor in. And there you go. We just get a little bit more breakup on the head, just so it feels like it's not completely with the rest of the body. I will break this up more as I start to polish things, but just for my key focus when I'm looking at the shot right now is, okay, I want the main thing is that the head should not be the exact same timing as the rest of the body. Then when I go into like the more refined elements, then I'll start to go, okay, sorry about the sirens if you can hear those. Then okay, maybe the shoulder breaks up, maybe there's a bit more weight in the arm. So that's when I got that's my thought process later, when I start to tide things down. But right now, that's the key element I want to look at. So now we've got this like little lumbering. So he goes, sways to the left, sways to the right, looks down, and he continues. And there's just a little breakup in the head looking down. And I will start to, when I start to polish this, maybe it'll feel too broad, and I just want to be focusing more on his face. So we'll play around with it. Okie dokie. So let's grab these controls, all the controls, not these controls. And now this is our new key pose, and we started to add a breakdown in here. So there's like a double beat in here, where first he looks slightly and then he looks more. What I am noticing is from this pose to this pose, they feel kind of even in terms of how big the spacing is going from screen right. So it's not like he has one small take and then one bigger take. I don't want it to feel too ABA. So what I mean by that is we don't want to feel like each action that we do is repetitive. And just by helping break up the spacing, so maybe one's a bit slower and shorter and the next one's a bit faster. So it's more like a kind of thing, rather than just going, it'll make it feel too robotic. So I'm trying to help break that up. So essentially what I'm going to do is in this first key, so this is the first action here, I'm going to take those keys. So there's two keys in there just to define that. I'm going to take those two keys, which in the graph editor are these two, and I'm going to blend them. Oh no, I'll probably scale them. I'm going to scale them to the favor left. So now they're favoring back to this key. Let's see what it looks like when I blend. I just want to see the difference. Yeah, I think blending felt better. Still, I'm looking at the neck. The neck and the upper chest. So in this area in particular, these two controls. they feel like they're doing most of the labor here and they're feeling too much. I'm just going to bring those back to even more. And now the shoulder's slightly overcompensating. So I'm going to take those 2 keys too, bring those back a bit. And then again, in the neck and now the head, I'm also feeling still too broad. So I'm just bringing these back. I want it to be subtle. The eyes can do a lot of the work. I'm not too bothered about the eyes. It's mostly in there. Oh, I just realized I selected the wrong keys. Reverse. It's okay, we can make these mistakes. We're not perfect. So it's those 2 keys. Okay, so we're going to take the chest, the head, the neck, and the shoulder. Grab those 2 keys. I was going one too early. There we go. And we're bringing that back. I feel like I maybe went too much on the head. So let's unselect the head, grab those 2 keys, bring them back. There we go. I think if anything, we can now dial up the head ever so slightly. So I'm still scaling to the left, but away from it. So the left side of the keys here, if I'm favoring this way, now I'm favoring towards my previous pose. Now going to the right side of that favors away. So now it's going, there you go, it's getting more contrast. Maybe that was a bit too much, so I'm favoring back. That feels about right. And then there. And I think from these 2 keys here, so now we're easing out here again to this position. I think we can get more contrast out of those. There we go. And I just want to get a bit more of an appealing angle. The eyes are starting to feel a little disconnected in here. So I'm just going to get a bit close on the eyes and just refine that a bit more. There's something about the eyelids where they're sitting where I feel like this one needs to be slightly higher. I'm looking at the distance on the pupils to the iris and the lids, that relationship, and making sure that feels connected. That feels a bit better. And again in here, that shape there, I think it just needs to be a little bit more flat. Just to connect so the apex sits on the lid. I feel like that feels a bit better. Yeah, that feels better. So in here, I'm just going to make sure that the eye poses also hit and favor that shape. There we go. And then similarly, our new head pose, make sure that that favors. There we go. And I will create small arcs in there, which is where the baking on twos part comes in. I'm just making sure that everything's super clear before we go before we dive any deeper. If you guys have more questions, please fire away. The chat's been quite quiet recently. It doesn't have to be related to this shot. Remember, you can ask me any question you want. Make it as hard as you want. I'm more than happy to ask this. I kind of like it when people ask me questions where I'm just like, oh man, I don't know how to answer this. Like sometimes even at work, you know, people ask you questions. You're like, you know what? I haven't thought about that. So I like those questions. But yeah, I know that I understand you guys are just processing and concentrating on what I'm doing too. I'll try to be efficient. Just saving the scene. Are you finding it different challenge to talk through all your process and steps as you do them? Yeah, it's hard, man. I've had a fair bit of practice in it. I've been doing this kind of thing. Like I did my first live stream with Anime Dojo, which was a course that was run by an old studio that I used to work at. And yeah, that's that was my first challenge, and that was actually when I did my Spider-Verse like fan thing that I made. I was streaming that at the time, and it was tricky, but you kind of get used to it. I think the hardest part is you kind of get into a zone when you're animating, and by constantly explaining what you're thinking about, you never really fully get in that zone, which is where I start to tangent sometimes when I'm explaining things. But yeah, I've had a bit of practice, but I'm by no means flawless at it. So in here, I've now created an ease out. I'm going to have maybe the eyes lead the action here. I want to make the head still favor to what I had before, just so that the eyes connect there. And I want to make sure the eyelids connect straight away. And there is going to be a tiny bit of disconnect with the brows, but I will get a bit more connection there when I get into polish. But right now, seeing that relationship with the eyelids, I want to get like at least some kind of micro connection where the brows connect into that too. Like the face should feel fully connected around each socket. Oh, nice, man. I didn't know you streamed. You have to plug yourself in the chat so the guys can check it out too. I wanna see what you've been streaming as well. We need to get more people on the streaming platform. It's really educational. I know not everybody has the time. It's pretty tough, but yeah, I mean, I don't always find the time to do this stuff either. So in here, I'm going to create another key. I just noticed that these hit on, that's an uneven. And I don't like that. We don't like evens here. 59, 53, 57, nice. 59. There you go. So you can see, when you're looking at my keys right now, everything's pretty much going on forwards as it looks, but the spacing is completely different in each one. Joe Animates, check him out, guys. Just popped your link in the Agora community Discord too, by the way, hopefully. Oh, that's amazing. Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate that. Yeah, Agora's great. I did a little bit of work for them back in the days. No, it wasn't that long ago. I did some like analysis videos for their frame by frame stuff. And then we did the Agora challenge a while back as well, which is also in the YouTube channel. You can check that out. Will this be on your Twitch later? Yes. So all of these streams are saved, but unfortunately, just with how Twitch works, they're only on there for 2 weeks. So if you do want to check this out beyond the 2-week mark, they'll be uploaded to my YouTube channel. I don't edit them because I've learned over time that editing, I mean, we did like a 9-hour stream once over like 24 hours. And like a 24-hour challenge, we did 9 hours of streaming. And then editing that took me like 4 weeks, and it was insane. And I mean, it made a more concise video, but it's just way too labor intensive, and I don't have the funding to hire an editor. This is more just to help you guys out. I don't really expect any funding to come out of this. So yeah, that took a long time. So now I've kind of got out of the editing thing, and I'm just, whatever video we stream here, like that's what goes on YouTube. So you're going to see some very long videos come out, but it's fine. You can flick through it. It's a little late here, so I'm watching the recording. No worries. Yeah, I know it's going to be like time difference is pretty tough for everyone, so I appreciate you guys sticking around if you do, and if not, I'm more than happy. I really appreciate that you guys like would even check out the recording. So thank you. Now I'm going to add a little favor out here. I want this to feel quite sharp now. So you can see how in between these two keys, let's dive in the timeline a bit closer. So I have 2 keys here. Like there's 4 frames to play with, but I favored to ease out on the latter frame of those 2s. So that way it'll give us a sharper spacing between here. And again, I can lead with the eyes again. I don't want to go too deep. So just gonna favor that back slightly. There we go. And that'll give us a tighter spacing in there. And I want to make sure that I just have a nice clean moving hold in here. So I'm going to be favoring into that key there. And then we can break it up a little bit more later. Maybe add a bit more follow through on the head just to break it up. Let's ask a question for you guys, so you guys can be thinking too. This is just more of a, I want to kind of get to know you guys as we do this. Get to know my audience. So here's a question for you guys. What is your top 3 Studio Ghibli movies? Have a think about it. Let me know your thoughts. And then we can have a little discussion. I'm curious. Obviously it's subjective. I just, you know, they have a pretty vast, different tonally, like kind of range of movies. So I'm curious to know what your favorites are. Most people have seen Studio Ghibli movies, so. Cool. And then there's a beat in here where he's thinking again. Gonna check my reference to make sure that is correct. Yeah, there's like micro expressions where he's kind of just internally processing. So there's a little face beat in there. So I want to make sure that that reads too. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new key, and then this is going to be our new key favoring in, and it seems super subtle, but can you see the head key continues over those, like literally those 10 frames, the head's still moving. Princess Mononoke, Porco Rosso, Totoro. Nice, man. Yeah, I like that lineup. I do like Princess Mononoke. That's definitely like their slightly darker era, which I do respect, and I do tend to lean towards darker movies, so I do like that. But there's some, I think, for me personally, my favorite thing about Studio Ghibli movies is like the more mundane ones where there's like not a whole lot happens, and it's more just about the charm of the characters and all the small moments that they go through. So like, these aren't my favorites in this particular order, but just for example, films like that are something like Totoro. I really like Kiki's Delivery Service. One that's not as popular, but I really like, is My Neighbors the Yamadas. So funny. And it's just like the day-to-day life things. Yeah, it's hard to nail it down to final 3, but like I love those movies. So in here we have a little micro expression with the brows and the eyes changing. There's like a little squint in there. So I'm gonna have the brows begin to favor into that. And then again on the eyes, we're gonna get a little bit of squinting going on. There's a little bit of a connection in there. So I'm just going to grab the eyes. Make sure that we get a bit more of that squint and that thought process. Most of the squint comes from the lower lids. So I want to make sure that that happens. And then I'm just getting a bit of more of a connection in the upper cheeks and the lower lids too, just to connect with that. So that feels like there's some tissue, you know, going on there. And I'm going to get a slight different eye beat where the eyes just slightly look back. Again, when we do face polish, I'll be going in and making sure that everything doesn't feel too dead and around the mouth and everything, just so we get some change. But I'm just looking at the main beats right now. And then again, favoring the eyes so that they dart and they're not too drifty. And I think that eye squint can favor in slightly sharper too. So I'm gonna blend that in. There you go. Cool. Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke. Nice. Spirited Away is great. I mean, my personal favorite 3. Oh, it's hard, man. In no particular order. Spirited Away is in there, of course. Totoro. My third is so hard. Oh, man. I feel like Nausicaa Valley of the Winds doesn't get enough rep. So I want to mention that as like an honorable, but I can't say it's my favorite. I think Kiki's is great. I think maybe Kiki I would go with, just because I love how light-hearted and like mundane it is. I do love Howl's Moving Castle. Again, an incredible one. It's one of those two. It's so hard to say, but I do really like Totoro. So I think these in-betweens are fine. Just having a look in here. Just make sure that we got that spacing. There's something about this key with the head doesn't... I feel like it needs to favor in. There we go. And I think the head can also lead a bit sharper. There you go. Just so it leads the action and then it kind of stabilizes. So if we look at the tip of the nose is what I'm looking at. He's got a very prominent nose, which helps. But if you look at the spacing, can you see how the spacing gets tighter? I'm slightly favoring the head towards that angle, so then it kind of levels out by the end. It's very subtle, but you'll see it in the curves. And then here, I want to make sure that we got a sharp ease out. Make sure the head eases out slightly less. Eyes don't fixate yet. There you go. That's good. My spacing is pretty tight. When I'm looking at like, I've added some keys already on twos to make that feel sharp. So I'm not having to do too much work in terms of adding in-betweens. I reckon Spirited Away would be in my top 3. I've just seen too many times. Yeah, I know, right? It's amazing. It's definitely like, I would say it's definitely his more like Western movie in terms of like its structure and like the formula of the movie. I would say it feels slightly more Western, but not in a bad way. It's like I would say it's Miyazaki's take on like a Western, like a more American Hollywood style movie. It still has his flair, but you can definitely tell he was trying to expand the audience because there were like around that time when they were making it back, I think it was like 2001. They were definitely starting to get some more audience in the West, and so I think that was his way of saying like, here's one that's like slightly more down your route. So here I want to add an ease out. Right now we've got an anticipation, but we're not easing out of that. So again, on the 4 here, maybe want to drag the head a little bit more so we get a bit more of an arc. Favor in. And then maybe a little bit in the chest. Oh, we're on the wrong key. So that's going to go down. This one's going to favor up. There we go. Now it feels like it's dragging a bit too much because it's only in anticipation. I just want to break up the body a little bit. So I'm going to keep that in there. Yeah, that feels okay. But here I want to lead the eyes again. My eyes are in headspace. God damn it. I forgot about that. So around here, I want to snap more into there. And similarly here. And I'll blend them back. And then in here, I think we need to favor more that way. He looks slightly too high here, I think. Just notice the music has stopped. Yes, I want to continue. Cool. I think Akira is amazing. I have a t-shirt from Akira. It's not the stereotypical Akira as well. It's like a graphic designy one. It's really cool. Yeah, I love that movie. So I actually, one of my like prized possessions is from Akira, and for my 18th birthday, way back when, I'm not too old, but starting to feel it. So my granddad bought me for my 18th a VHS of Akira. Now that doesn't sound too special, but this was so when they first distributed Akira in like the 80s. I think it was the late 80s. They actually had they released like a bunch of copies of the VHS, but it was accidentally the film was put in backwards, and so when you play it, it's literally in rewind. But they actually released and distributed them, and then everyone started complaining. They're like, "Oh god!" So they like took them off of shelves. It's a manga. Oh yeah, I mean it's a manga too. Yeah, I was thinking of the anime, the movie adaptation. Sorry, but yeah, I've read the manga too. But yeah, like it was played backwards, and so they only released so many of them. Yeah, I know you watch it. You watch it right to left. Nice. I'm glad not all anime is like that. Jesus. But yeah, so it was rewound backwards, but there was only like several thousand of them released. No, it's funny. It made me laugh. I like it. So yeah, and so my granddad, like explained this to me and was like, "So these are really hard to find," and he just bought it for me. He thought, like, I told him I was into animation. He thought I was really into anime. I wasn't actually into anime at the time. I didn't really know. I wasn't educated in the art of anime yet, but it came with time. So I'm going to make sure his hand's clenched there, so it's a sharp action there. I want to make sure that I don't favor out too early there. I want to get a beat on the hand clenching first, but still a little bit of connection, like that. Cool. I think we're going to bake on twos very soon, because the rest of it's pretty refined in here. Yeah, I think we're good. Let's blind bake. I was just flicking through to make sure. So this is essentially, you can see, just as a general rule of like how many keys I would put down. You can see in the timeline, that's roughly where, like, it depends on the action, of course, but this is for a subtle acting shot. That's kind of the amount of keys I would put down for something in order to get like all the performance that I need before I start blind baking. So now you can see I've got all these keys in the graph editor and they're all stepped. So what I'm going to do before we start is save a version. And before we continue, I've been told I've literally been going to appointments for my shoulder, so I need to stand up every now and then and make sure that I'm working my muscles. So I'm going to be back in like 10 seconds, literally, just so I can stand up and do a bit of a stretch. So I'll be back in a sec, guys. I'm back. Got to get those stretches. You know how they tell you, like, incremental save in Maya, where they're just like, save guys, don't forget. Like, I'm trying to get into the practice of standing up and moving my body so I don't get completely locked. So now you use your ad. Yeah, we're going to start seeing a bit more of my workflow coming through now. What we've seen so far is pretty standard for a lot of animators, but this is not some animators use this method too, but I haven't seen it often. I think this is my stubbornness of where I used to just work on twos when I first started animating, and this is just kind of what I stuck by over the years. But essentially, you've seen now, I've just literally hit everything on 2s. I've hit spline, sorry. Now the entire thing is on spline. Everything still feels pretty concise. There's nothing in there that's like completely broken. Most of the actions are there. So now I'm going to go through, and just so you guys know, the main reason I keep my blocking on evens, so you can see it starts on frame 1, so everything is going to, all my keys that I've done so far have been on odd numbers. And the reason I've done that is so that when I bake, I'm not losing the keys that I've posed. Because if I start doing some things on evens, when I bake it on 2s, that specific key that I've constructed is not going to be, you know, it's not going to be there anymore. It's going to be halfway between something that I've, because like it's going to be baking on this, on the like the key that the computer is interpolating in this spline. And so I just keep it for my own peace of mind. I keep it on evens in my blocking. On like, I keep it on those, well, odds in this case, because it starts on frame 1. But then if I want to change my timing, or if I want to hit a very specific beat on a 1 or something, then I can shift it later. Have you tried getting a standing desk? I actually do have a standing desk, but I've been standing a lot today. So I'm sitting down currently. I was standing last, and if you look in part 1, I was standing. But yeah, I did invest in a standing desk. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to sell it when I eventually move back to the UK. But, because I can't ship a desk. But I'll get another one when I'm back out there. When I'm back home. But yes, that's a good recommendation. For anyone who doesn't have one, maybe think about investing in a standing desk. Because it will help you, I promise. Cool. So now everything's splined. So I'm going to go on to, I have a little shortcut for this. I changed it to little loaf of bread. But it essentially means bake. So now you can see I've got here, I'm going to select my entire time slider. I'm going to set it, so it's, by default it's set to keep. So that's correct. And I've sampled by 2. So we've made sure that we've versioned up before we've gone any further. And I'm just going to hit bake. Now it's going to go through my entire animation and it's going to bake the entire thing down on 2s. And it's interesting because I can already see where I'm going to have to break up some of the spacing. So boom. Now you're like, oh my god, there are so many keys on this timeline. This is insane. Fear not, guys. We're going to do this chunk by chunk. The same way a lot of animators say when they're polishing, they put down the timeline into like only 10 frames and they focus on those 10 frames and then they move on to the next 10 frames and vice versa, you know, so on and so forth. So we're going to be doing that for this. Essentially, we're going to be going through the curves. Now I'm going to find my first key action, which is a fairly long and dragged out one, which is here, which is just the swaying left to right, which kind of finishes around frame 57. So I'm going to shrink down my timeline to frame 57. So now I'm only having to focus on these specific keys. And there's still a fair few to work through, but it's a slow action, so it's not too intimidating. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my curves in the graph editor. Now you can see I have no actions in the X on the root. So first I've selected the root control. Have I got anything in the Y? No. Have I got anything in the Z? Yes. So now you can see in my curves are doing some fairly funky stuff. I'm just going to actually look into the stream, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale up the graph editor just so you guys can see specifically what I'm looking at. We don't need to see my plugs at the moment. Hopefully that will help you guys see a bit clearer. Cool. So now I've got the root selected and we've got these controls in the Z. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to scrub through my animation and I'm going to be looking at exactly, very specifically, what is the Z axis doing in the root. And it's got this little left to right motion. And it generally is going to be leading the action because he's swaying, but it's all stemming from his root. So in here, I'm going to make sure that we start to ease out and favor in left to right. So in here, this feels a little sharp and it's a little bit weighty for me. So I'm just going to shrink that back a little bit. Just so we delay it ever so slightly. And we're going to grab these keys and I'm going to use the ease in and out slider from Animate, and I'm going to be favoring in and out of those keys. From the very beginning, we're going to be blending through. And I'm going to tweak them as I'm going through. And then we're going to have a little bit of an ease out here. And then we're going to favor back in to this key. So this is our like extreme. You can see over here, this is our next extreme key. So I'm going to grab all these keys. Can you see how it like punches here? And I think it punches too much. So do you use about 4 frames to ease out? I think this is just the head of the shot. I don't have a general rule of thumb for that kind of thing. It depends on what the timing that I'm going for. But I think for this swing, actually, it's quite slow. So I do want to be favoring the left and right. So I have chosen to ease out for about 4 frames here. Yes. But yeah. It's not like there's no hard rule of thumb. I'm kind of just looking for, there's a feeling that I'm looking for, and that kind of defines how much I ease in or out. Hey Arran, I hear sirens. I heard the animation police after you. Yeah, they see me using Animate and they're like, no, you can't use that. It's cheating. I actually heard that. There was a student of mine who told me that their tutor told them that they can't use animation tools because it's cheating. And I'm like, what load of nonsense. It's called efficiency. It's not doing the animation for you. It's not an animate button. I wish it was. But yeah, I heard that once and I was like, ignore that guy. Hey, do you recommend Anim School? I think Anim School is great. I have never attended an online school, so I can't say from experience, but I do have several friends who have come from Anim School. They're very successful animators. Of course, a school isn't going to... There's no guarantee that, like, you have to put in the work. This is something that I find everywhere. Even when I do coaching, is like, the result that you get by the end of it is how much work you put in and how much you're willing to study. So I do find a lot of that, like, a lot of the successful work comes from those who work hard. So no matter really where you go, that's going to help. But definitely the mentorship is very good at Anim School. They've got some very highly respected animators. They have online courses. Like, they have actual lessons, which not all courses provide. So I think that's good. It does come at a price. It's definitely not a cheap course. But then they definitely have their value. If it helps, it's a lot cheaper than a university, which I did go to. And I'm still paying off that loan. So... you know, there's ways to look at it. I can't tell you from experience, though, unfortunately. I can't be like, hey, I went to Anim School and it's great. But, yeah. Where did I go to school? I went to University of Bournemouth in England, which is a pretty highly respected course. It's not particularly easy to get into. It has its, like, I definitely find that I'm saying this live on record, but I think it's the case of every university. It's not specific to my course, but, you know, reputation, a lot of it does come from the students. You know, if someone has a good reputation, all the good students are going to want to go there. And for that reason, when you get a bunch of, like, passionate people together, the same as everywhere, you know, you're going to get some really good results. And so I do find that if you start with a good reputation, you're going to maintain that just from, like, hardworking students. But yeah, that's where I went to. Doesn't the 2-frame ease out seem kind of fast for a non-cartoony shot? It does. Yes. And maybe I do need to slow that out, and I can smooth that later. But I don't want it to feel too floaty. I find it's better to exaggerate things and then bring it back than it is to go too reserved and then have to kind of extreme things later. It's a lot easier to shrink something back. So right now, when I'm looking at this, it doesn't feel too bold. It feels okay. Again, there's kind of like a 4-frame ease out there as well. So I'm favoring into the poses as opposed to out of them. because I want to get that swaying where it's like it hangs each side, you know, like a pendulum. But instead this pendulum has a muscle driving it. So generally when it's got more muscle forcing it, it's going to favor faster. If that makes sense. Like the ease ins are going to be favored rather than the ease outs. That's my logic. Cool. So that's the only curve we was only using in the Z on that control. Nothing in here, nothing in here. When I get to polish, maybe I start adding these things in. But for now, I won't be. I'm only looking at the ones that I've intentionally used. Cool. So now we're going into the Z axis on the midsection of his body. Now, to make sure that I'm getting a clear overlap, what I'm going to do is also select the root, and I'm going to isolate the Z axis, and then I'm going to press 2. Let's press 3. Sorry, if I press 3 in the graph editor, it's actually going to compare them side by side. Come on. There we go. So now I've got these two curves. I'm going to shrink them back, please. And I can see roughly where I want to be easing in and out of. Maybe I'm just going to press 1. Let's just have a look. The only problem is I don't want to... You can see how they start to overlap. Let's see how... That's a bit better. I just want them to be closer together. It's fine. Not a big deal. Cool. So now I can compare these two curves together. So this is the root that we made earlier, this curve. And then this is my upper chest. You can see it's not actually doing a whole lot of change. So I just want to make sure that I'm easing out later. So say we were 4 frames before. Now we're going to ease this out by 6 frames. Now there's a trick that we can use if we really want to be smart about this. And it depends on how much value you want to change. But what I'm going to do is make sure that in the graph editor, I'm going to view, show buffer curves. And what that's going to do is now if I start to select this control and I start to manipulate it, can you see it preserves the original curve I had? So just for efficiency's sake, and this is a little trick that I sometimes use, stuff for like this where I'm trying to make a connection, I'm going to copy the curves in this section from the root, and I'm going to paste them onto this FK control. Now you can see that's changed, but what I can do is I can shrink that back so that we get this curve. So now this is the exact same I'm going to shrink that back so it connects back in, roughly in position. Now I'm just having a look. See, this was kind of going too early. We had a bit of a disconnect here. So it felt like we were starting to overshoot too much. I'm just having a look at the curve as we go through. So it's going quite early. It seems like I had an extra overshoot in here. So I want to offset. I'm just having a look. Can you see the timing was very different from what I had on the roots to the chest? It had an extra rock in there. So I feel like maybe it was rocking too much anyway. So we can always add a little bit of an overshoot, but I want to make sure that it's dragging. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these curves now, and I'm going to go right click in Animate, time offsetter, and then I'm going to click the third one to the right, and that's going to offset it by 2 frames. Boom. Now we've already offset the animation. I'm going to do that one more time. Well, actually, it's going through the body, so maybe 2 frames would be fine. And then make sure it goes back to stepped. So now, this is the exact same animation as the root was, but it's offset. It's a little trick you can use. And then I'm going to do the exact same on the upper. So again, grab that key. We've got our buffer curves on, so we can see we don't. The thing is, when I'm copying and pasting, I don't want to lose what I initially blocked. So you can see I have that curve, so now I can start to match it, but with the relationship that I had from the root. This is the same tech Mike at Animate taught me. This is awesome. Do you know why? I'm so glad you've said this. Because I was thinking of taking Michael Makovich's animation collaborative course, because I've heard so much about his layered approach. And if he uses a very similar method, this is really cool. Because I knew that he was I knew he did a lot of copy and pasting and like layering in his animation. And so this is really cool to know that he uses a very similar technique. And then I'm going to offset again, but this time by 4 frames. And then hit stepped. Oh, not Michael, though he's amazing. This is the same Mike at Anim Collab taught me. Oh, so Mike and Michael. Oh, Mike Stern. He's a different Pixar animator. Oh, nice. That's awesome. Still, I think Michael Makovich uses a very similar method. I think he goes more into spline, but like the same philosophy of copying and pasting curves and offsetting them. I think is something that they generally teach at Anim Collaborative. But that's still really cool. Like, Mike Stone is also a great animator. So now, when we look through, we should have a bit more of a connection overlapping through the body. Yeah, there's just a subtle shift in there, which is really cool. And so now I'm going to do that, but on the neck. So I'm going to grab this curve that I've got from the upper chest. And I'm going to go into the Z on the neck. Or is it the Y? Oh. Interesting. Is it the Y? Is it the X? Oh, I'm on the wrong axis. That would help, wouldn't it? I was in translates. There we go. So you can see now, we've got some pretty funky connection going on just looking at that curve compared to the chest. So I want to make sure that we get a bit of dragging in there. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to paste that curve. Paste. Make sure, again, buffer curve really helps with this. So now we can see the relationship that we initially had. And that's all good. Seems like it was pretty on spot, to be honest. Oh, no, it wasn't. Ooh. Did I offset by accident? Yeah, I did. There we go. Move up, please. Oh, why is that doing that? Oh, I don't know. There was something funky going on with the buffer curve. But it should be fine. There you go. There's just a bit more dragging. I'm not going to offset the neck too much because I feel like the connection between the upper chest and the neck isn't going to be too big. If I did, it would only be a tiny amount, which I can probably do in polish. Yeah, the copy and paste a lot. He called it master splining a shot. Nice. Thanks for joining us, Andre. Really appreciate it. Yeah, we got some awesome animators in today, which is it means a lot of pressure on me. These guys are far better. So, yeah, if there are any tips that these guys can give you, yeah, definitely ask them while they're here. I'm sure they're just coming in to judge me and be like, oh, I wouldn't do that. But it's fine. I'm here to learn too. So if there's anything you guys can give me tips on, this isn't just for you guys learning from me. I'm happy to learn. Cool. So now we've got that curve. Again, because we didn't offset it, I could probably just use the same curve again. And I'm going to paste in the Z. Oop, I'm on the wrong key. Okay, here. Paste. We've got our buffer curve to work from. Because you can see that was a very different curve there. My buffer curves are doing something funky today, though. They kind of feel like they're starting to offset without me touching anything, which is a little odd. Not sure why that's doing that. Maybe you guys can tell me. I haven't experienced that before though. But otherwise, the curve looks fine here. Now I'm going to offset this again. How's that feel? Let's drag it a bit more, see how that feels. Yeah, that feels good. We're getting a bit of disconnect in the Y now, I believe, because there's a little bit of gimbal going on. So I'm just going to copy that same curve. And we can always offset that slightly as well, just so that it's not a one-to-one. I want to see how this feels. Grab that key, scale this up. Need to reverse this, so go scale to the left, reverse. Something like that. Just see how that feels. Yeah, that feels pretty good. I'm going to see how it feels if I offset this slightly, just so we don't get a complete one-to-one with the Z and the Y. Let's see how that feels. That feels pretty good. I'm actually going to offset more in the Z, but keep in the Y. So that way, it feels like the head drags more, rather than in... So I'm going to go back like this. So this is our initial key. And then in here, I want to offset this a little bit more. So that it feels like it comes more from, like, it'll make the head feel a bit weightier coming from the Z. There we go. Maybe that's a bit too much. Make sure we get a bit of follow through in this arc. So it felt like it was starting at the head of the shot. Like that. Cool. That feels fairly natural. I feel like this curve could be shrunk a little bit. May I ask for advice about applying for jobs? That's a good one. Have a great night. It was a pleasure to watch you animate. Can't wait to watch the rest tomorrow. Cheers, Lucio. Really appreciate you joining us. Have a good one, man. Yes. Hello. It's good to see you in the chat, man. In terms of applying for jobs, that's a good question. So my general rule of thumb is LinkedIn. I get most of my jobs from. So if there's a particular studio I'm looking for, there is a spreadsheet that you can find online. I'll send links to that if you guys want, where it just has a giant list of different studios, different countries, what kind of work they do, feature film, TV, games, etc., etc. And you can kind of see what you're looking for. Go on the websites. If there are any openings, then you can obviously apply there. Next step that I would go for is once I've applied directly to the website, then I go on LinkedIn. I find a recruiter from that place. I send them a message directly. Say that I saw there were openings, so that they know that you've already actively looked for the job. Then sends them my reel directly. If they say, have you applied to the website? You could say, yes, you've already done that. So they're like, great, you've already taken initiative. You're on the database. We can then, by just actively going out of your way to contact and find a recruiter from the studio, it shows you're taking initiative. And I think that helps a lot in terms of just like moving the process along. It also helps if you have someone who works on a studio who's willing to give you a recommendation. I personally don't like asking for recommendations. I feel like at least on my end, if I feel like I'm confident enough to put myself forward for somebody, then I would do that on my end. But I don't think there's any harm in asking a colleague saying, hey, do you know if there are any jobs going at the moment? And then if they do know, then obviously that's for them to say, I can put you forward if you want. But I wouldn't actively ask a friend or someone who I know who works from a studio, can you give me a recommendation? It just feels a little too invasive. You know, you kind of feel pressured, and then they may say they will. Maybe they'll say yes just so they don't hurt your feelings, and then they don't because they didn't feel confident enough in your skill set, and then you're expecting something and then they don't, and then you're like, oh, but I got a recommendation when maybe you didn't. So I do find, just as a word of advice, if they want to put you forward, let them make that offer. Don't ask for recommendations. I get it all the time, and I would say unless I felt really confident in that person's work, or I'm like, man, we need to get this guy on, or I felt like they deserved a chance because they had potential, then I would put them forward. But yeah, just be vigilant with that, guys. Don't force someone into a corner where they feel like they have to say yes, because it will make, it makes people uncomfortable, especially when it comes to having to put someone else's reputation on the line for you. Like, it's a very big thing, and I wouldn't expect that from anyone. So that's something that I would say in terms of advice when applying for trying to get recommendations. But it definitely helps to have them. So if you have a friend who's willing to give you one, it's going to help you a lot. It'll put you forward to the list. Like, it'll put you at the front of the queue. It probably won't get you a job guaranteed, but it will definitely get you exposure in terms of getting your work in front of a supervisor or a recruiter. And then it will be up to them to decide. Cool. So we're going through. I want to get a little bit of an arc going through on the face, on the head, just in the X. Do you have any tips on, keeping track of all this stuff? Graph editor, controls, animation principles. I'm working on a shot right now, and it's a big jump for me in complexity, and it takes a lot of time. I'm feeling like I forgot how to animate. That's a good question, and I have an animator's checklist. So I'll spam that in the chat right now because I can get that up very quickly. This is you've probably seen it before, but this definitely helps. You can create one for yourself, but yeah, I find this helps me so much. So share, grab the link, copy link. Just gonna spam this in the chat for you guys now. So this was actually formulated not just by myself, but this was also some advice that I had seen online from other animators. Oh, I've given you the edit version. Can I delete that? Oh no. Okay. You guys have got the ability to edit that link. Please don't edit it. If you want to make a copy of it yourself, I deliberately changed the settings so that it couldn't be edited. So that shouldn't work. Yes, please be nice to me. It took me a long time to make that list. So I'm just going to see if I can change the editing, right? Sorry, I know this is deviating away from the actual... Deviating from the actual... Anyone with this link, it says you can only view it. So why did that give you the editing rights? That's so weird. Anyway, if you have the ability, there you go. That should be the sharing one. Oh, it says edit. I think it's just my own editing. You shouldn't be able to edit that. It should only be for sharing. Yeah, you can't edit it. Phew. Okay. Just double checking. Right. Basically, that is a big checklist of all the things you can think about when you're animating, and it will help kind of refresh your mind so that you don't deviate too much from what your intentions are. So in here, as we're going down, I want to get a little bit of down action going on. Just a subtle amount. And we're going to be easing out here. So we're going to have a lot of these out. And it's dragging. And then we're going to hang in here. And then we're going to favor slightly more, just cushion into that. That's going too broad for me. Going to reduce this curve. And I want to smooth it out a little bit. I want to hang in here. And then the head comes down here. And that's going to be a sharper action. I don't want to have any, and I don't want to ease out for this. I just want to hit straight into looking down. And have that be a sharp spacing. I want to have a little bit of a hold in there. We're losing a bit of follow through on the head here. Feels like it needs to continue around a little bit more. So I'm just going to continue that. I think it's just the spacing. It felt too tight. I don't want to go too broad with it. There we go. And then I think in here we can start to blend this in a bit more and make this a little sharper. Cool. Thanks for the list. By the way, I've not found your graph editor is set to normalize view. It'll give you weird results if you're doing this buffer curve technique. Normalize view. How do you mean? Oh, I see. Yes. Thank you. That was a good point. Maybe that's why my buffer curve was a bit funky, because it wasn't set to normalize. Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate that. That was a very good point that I completely forgot about. I wasn't set to the original view in the graph editor, so it may have actually been putting my buffer side by side and not a one-to-one relationship. Just to make that clear for some people who may not know what Joe was saying. But no, I really appreciate that. Thank you. I think stacked is, by the way, which is default. Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah, it's set to default now. So it's a little follow through. I think it's dragging for too long now. I'm going to ease out here. Comes through. This needs to feel a little bit more linear, I think, just following through here. And then I want to make this a little sharper. And then on the Z, again, just need to track through this. Feel like that needs to keep going. Just the spacing thing. It felt like it was getting too tight and it was hanging for too long. It needs to continue through. There we go. And then again in here. Cool. Let's have a look at that. There's a lot of movement going on, especially in the head. And I do want to reduce it now. I want it to be very subtle. I don't want you to be constantly rocking back and forth, but I deliberately make it slightly broader, just so you guys get a read on it. This needs to be sharper still. I just want to get a very clear contrast. On the head looking down, a very clear read. it's in here. These curves need to be slightly broader. And then the neck, it feels a bit too sharp. So I'm going to go look in the x-axis on the neck. There you go. I could tell that was sharp just from the spacing when I was looking in there. So I just want, in the perspective, so I just want to cushion that a little bit more. So I'm just going to ease those curves. I appreciate you over animating for our untrained eye. No. We've all got to be as perceptive as possible, you know? Like, it helps me too, you know? You've just got to... I think in here I've overcomplicated the x-axis. There you go. Shrink that back a bit. There we go. Just a little bit of nuance. And now the eyes feel like they need to lead earlier. So one thing when I'm going on twos is I need to make sure that the eye beats and the darts happen at least, because we're going on twos now, they should be pretty spot on. Like, not in terms of the spacing and how much they travel, but at least where they should be at each time on these twos. So in here, I want to actually lead earlier. I actually want to see if I can ease out the head here just to get a bit of connect. You see that's a bit too sharp now. Just want to add a little bit of ease out, just as a tiny connection between the eye looking down and the head. So we're starting to get, like, this is what I mean by refining, is even though we're on twos and we're in spline, I'm like half like figuring, like half reworking the curves that I had from my blocking, but then also beginning to think about some of the connection so that when I go into polish, I'm not having to think about the early, like the basic connections. Like the relationship between, say, the head and the eyes should already be working before I polish. The same way the relationship between the head and the neck should already be working pretty spot on before I polish. I shouldn't be having to think about those core fundamentals too late. And so that's kind of what I'm thinking about. When it comes to like actual nuance, I'm thinking more in like the face structure and the relationships there. I'll start to refine a bit closer in my polish pass. But like in terms of body, that should be pretty close. At least in these main pieces. When it comes to like the subtle shifts in weight, then maybe I'll do that in polish when it comes to like how the arm is leaning. Maybe if there's a bit of weight on one side, then maybe I'll add a bit more pressure on the leg. You know, because as he's leaning on his leg, there's going to be a bit more weight when he leans to one side. So that's where I'm starting to think more in polish terms. But right now, I don't think about that because that's getting ahead of myself. I'm mostly looking at the body. The body, anywhere from the spine up to the head, should be pretty refined before I go into any polish terms. And I think in here I can add a little eye dart just so that we get a bit of thought process going on. So I'm just going to shift it slightly to the right, slightly up. Very subtle, but enough to make it read. And then I'm going to make sure that all those curves there also favor that key. So I'm just blending them all to 100% so that when it snaps, there you go. You just see that little tick in there in the eye dart. Similarly in here, he just feels a little bit too wall-eyed. I know he's internally thinking, but we don't want him to feel dead inside. So in here, I might just have a little eye dart down, maybe again to the right. just so that we free it up a tiny bit. A general rule of thumb, which might help you guys, which is a little tip that I was taught from Sean Sexton, is when you're animating eyes, if you're going to do an eye dart, that eye pose should at least sit for a minimum of 4 frames, because it takes that long for the brain to actually focus, like for the eyes to focus. So that's the bare minimum that you should hold an eye position for. In terms of when you're eye darting, some people do eye darts where it's like it's only over 2 or 3 frames and it darts again, where it just feels unnatural. So I think that should be the bare minimum. Right now this holds for 8. Yes, this holds for 8 before he looks down. I think I might bring that in earlier, so let's see if we can bring that a bit earlier. And then we got a bit of a longer beat. Cool. So now what I'm going to do is, this is my final position on this pose at the very end. So we're calling 57 is our final settling pose. Now, at the moment, the head swaying and everything feels a bit too broad for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to favor everything to that final position. So we've just been asked, do you ever use caching? I do. It's set to an exclamation mark at the moment, which means I've reached my maximum. So I need to sort out my caching. But yes, I usually do. I don't know if there's a way. Flush cache. There we go. So now it should start caching again. Yes, I do use caching. I don't generally use it for playback though. I mostly use it just so when I'm flicking frames, it makes it easier to scrub when I'm kind of going 1 frame at a time like this. That helps. But I don't use it for playback because I still don't trust that my CPU is fast enough to play it in real time. I don't want to have any frame drops, so I still play Blast. When I'm happy with like a stage at what I've got to, I still play Blast, just for my own sanity. Because otherwise, I don't like the idea that when I'm playing, I'm like, oh, that doesn't feel right. Maybe there was a frame or 2 that was missing that would have helped that. You know, every frame counts. So, yeah. I was just wondering, because it caused crash for me recently. Oh. Maybe it has to do with how much CPU memory is being used. I don't know. I only built this PC like a year ago, so it's pretty good as it goes. I haven't had any real crashes in a long time on this, but it definitely has its moments. But yeah, I haven't had any crashes, not from CPU caching anyway. Probably from over density in a scene or something, but yeah, nothing too drastic. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab the root, all my controls up the spine, the neck. I kind of like the head action right now. I'm probably going to reduce the Z and the Y on the head, so I'm going to do that separately. But I've got all of this action up the spine here, and I'm going to go up to frame 57, and I'm going to grab all my rotations. There's no translations at this point, it's all rotation. So I'm going to grab all those keys, and I'm going to scale them. Let's blend them, because that means it's going to, I don't want, by scaling, it's going to kind of create a different feeling. The spacing will change, but by blending, it's maintaining all of that spacing, and it's just bringing it closer. So blending and scaling do different things. It's going to blend back. See how that feels. There you go. It's very subtle now in the body. If anything, I think we could bring that back. I think I've blended too much. It's actually not too bad. I think it's mostly in the neck and the head. So what I'm just going to do is grab the neck. It was mostly in that Z, I think. Just going to reduce that curve slightly. And then in the head, it was mostly in the Z and Y. Grab those curves, and I'm going to reduce them back to 57. See how that feels. Yeah, that feels pretty good. There needs to be a bigger change in the Y. I'm just tracking. Needs to be a bigger spacing here on that follow through. And then here I want to get a sharper action where it feels like an intentional head turn and action there. There you go. And then this follow through, I think is too much. It's on the Z. I think the Z overshoot here was too much. So I'm just going to grab that Z overshoot, bring that back, and I'm just going to blend this through a little bit. Again, this Z tilt feels too much, so I'm just going to grab that curve and also bring that back down. Just looking at it and kind of getting a feel for it. I feel like that position. So again, this is because I've set the head to head space. No, I've set the head space. I set the eyes to head space, and I generally don't work that way. What I'm probably actually going to do before I go any further, for those who don't know this technique, probably most of the pros will know this. I'd be surprised if they didn't, but I'll do it anyway, just for those who don't know. But I'm going to rebake all of my eye animation I currently have in world space, just for my own sanity, so that I know each time I've made a position that that was a conscious decision from me. And then when I go into polish, I rebake it back into headspace, and then I'll show you a technique I use just to keep the eye so it feels like it's maintained inside the socket on the eye direction. But for now, I would keep it at this stage. I would keep it in headspace, in world space. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to quickly copy and paste onto a locator the eye control. So you got the eye control there. I'm going to constrain the locator to said eye control. Hit key. Make sure blend parent is set to 1 on the locator. And I'm going to bake that through. Bake control. There you go. Why do you rebake back to the head space, if you don't mind me asking? So the reason I do this is because this is a tip that was given to me by an old colleague called Andrew Murray, a really good animator. And he explained to me, I think he got this tip from Mike Safanoff, who was an ex-Blue Sky animator. And he's worked at DreamWorks as well. And essentially, you want the head, when I'm moving my head left to right, even if I'm fixating on one spot in front of me, there's going to be a slight adjustment. It's a slight connection. So that, my eyes are never completely locked. They're always going to have a slight connection. There's going to be some influence from my head. So I bake it back into headspace, and then wherever the eyes were locked in one position, I go into the graph editor, and I can see the curve where that position was in headspace. It's now going to have all those curves to counter the head rotation, so that you can see the position of where it's countering. And essentially what I do is wherever that position is locked in world space, I then get those curves and I smooth them out just ever so slightly. So I highlight all those curves, and then I slightly dial the smoothing in Animate, and it blends it back so that it maintains back to the head. And that way you get a slight adjustment where it feels like the eyes are slightly being influenced by the head's rotation. It's a really clever technique, and I loved it. I was like, that is absolutely genius, and it's super subtle, but you'll feel it more than you'll see it. So yeah, I will be using that technique on this shot in later parts of the stream, probably in a few weeks' time. Yeah, if you think about it, you got to think about how the relationship between every single part, every control that you have at your disposal on the rig, what relationship does that have to different parts of the body, and how can you use that knowledge to like implement those different things to, you know, in your animation. So, you know, the same way when we breathe, when I do my breathing pass, which I still sometimes, it depends how prominent it is in the shot, and if it has a very specific thing. In here, it's kind of like an idle breathing, so I wouldn't think about it too much. But later I do a breathing pass, and the same way when I'm breathing with my chest, that it's going to have influence in the shoulders and a slight amount in the neck and the head. It's super subtle, but I would still be thinking about those relationships, and I'll be doing little passes on those so that you get that connection. So like, you've got to think about different ways, you know, even if you press down with your foot, if you want to have a compression feeling in the foot and you make it squash, maybe that's going to have ever so slight influence in the hips. You know, super subtle things that when you're thinking about polish, think about how one action that you're making is going to have a separate relationship to another part, and how you could ingest that somehow. Yeah, right? So yeah, the eye space one is a super useful one. So now you can see we've got all these curves. This is exactly what the eyes are doing. So now I'm going to go into my outliner, which you can't see, but I'm going to delete that constraint on the locator, and then I'm now going to constrain the eye to the locator. Constrain, add, set a blends there. So now, no matter what I change, the eyes are going to stay in that position. So now what I need to do is select the head space switch, and I'm going to set that to global, which on this is a value of 0. So I'm going to grab all the keys and set that to 0. So now it's in headspace. And now all I have to do is select that control again and rebake. So now it's going to preserve all of the positions that I initially had, but it's in a different space. Hold on. Apply. Oh, I was selecting the wrong thing. There we go, apply. There we go, it's rebaking. So there's a couple of jitters in there, but it's fine. We can clean that up as we go along. But now that's in headspace. So now what I have to do is go back into the outliner, select that control, delete that constraint. Now I can delete the locator, and boom. Now we've got all the animation that we had before, but it's in headspace. It's in world space. Woo! You can see the curves have changed. Delete that key. There we go. Cool. Yes, that's helped me a lot there. I think what I'll probably do is just play blast this, see what we've got. This is going to be an interesting one. I'm probably going to call this stream a night, but we'll see where we've got to with spline bake, and we're going to be going through the rest of the body. We'll do that in the next stream. And as we get further to the end of the shot, there's going to be a lot more connections and like more acting that we're going to be looking into in terms of cleanup on the twos. So that's going to be a bit more exciting than just having this swaying rocking motion. But there's definitely some techniques in here that you could have learned today. Cool. Would you say that extreme attention to relationships between different parts is a big thing that separates decent animation from top tier animation? Absolutely. I think so. So there's different like acting shots. They're just like, it's a level of believability. I think that it definitely gets to a point where, you know, there's so much refining has been done. Like, you've got the broad strokes of your refining done, and like all the main gestures, all your beats, all your poses are there, and you can have super non-refined animation that still feels really good. Now, some, like, for example, let's say, I don't know, there is some, if you think of some of the animation, some of the animated movies in the early 2000s, some of them aren't 100% refined. Let's say there's things, maybe even say like Shrek 1, and it's still pretty damn good animation, especially for the time. But there's probably going to be some nuance and some polishy things and some connection things that they could have done more. That maybe they were just limited by how sophisticated the rig was or how slow the software was. You know, there's different things, there's different like attributes there that could define how hard it was for them to animate and how much, like, how good the quality was. But it does get to a point where there's only so much the refining is going to add to the shot. And what I mean by that is the general audience. Us as animators, adding all those connections is going to just make the audience is going to make it feel more alive. They're just going to be like, wow, this feels like a real human thing, like an actual human being speaking and talking. Like, the only thing that separates it is I can physically see that maybe the design is a bit more exaggerated. But like, adding that, again, it depends on the style of animation too. If you're thinking something more along the lines of like a typical, when I say typical, they do vary when I say these things, but say a typical DreamWorks movie, which is known for being slightly more on the realistic end, like caricatured realism, they definitely lean more into that, having the relationship in the body and the mechanics when it comes to those things. And as does Pixar. So like, they definitely have, and Disney on the, like, its latter end, like its more recent stuff. So like, having those things, it definitely gives a sense of believability, but I wouldn't say it's essential, is what I would say. I would think having strong ideas, good acting choices, having strong poses, having clarity, and like an interesting rhythm, those things go a long way. Those are like the big broader strokes of the animation where that's really going to sell. And I still consider some of that, without the polish, top tier animation, if that helps. In my perspective, I can still see like an acting choice. I'm like, man, that's so freaking good. It's probably not as polished as I'd like it to be, but that's a really good idea. And I still consider that really good animation. Like, I still consider that top tier in my opinion, but the level of finesse is something that I would appreciate in like an execution as an animator. I would be looking at that thinking, man, they put a lot of work into connecting that body up, and I can appreciate that. But I don't feel like, in terms of like the broad stretches that it takes on the audience, I think the extra like 10% that you give in gives it a level of believability, but it's not going to be like the defining thing that makes your animation good or bad. Nice, you're gonna print it out. That's awesome. I can't take full credit. I did add a lot of my own experiences in there and some questions of my own. I would say 60% of it is my words, and then like 40% of it is other things that people have given me advice on over the years, and that I've kind of just regurgitated their advice. So I can't take full credit for the checklist. But yeah, it's all good. Thanks so much for joining, guys. I will play blast this before we head off, so we can see how far we've made it today. So this was Watson version 6. Make sure we're on the right. Yeah, we weren't on the right one. Play blasts. Version 6. Play blast. Cool. So while that's going through, if there's any final questions people have, fire them now before we head off. If not, I do hope to see you in the next one. We're kind of going to be continuing this process, but there will be different situations as we go through, so there's going to be different things to discuss. It is a little bit tedious, this part of the workflow, but I would say this is where like a good portion of my like effort goes into. And like the polish, I actually don't, it doesn't take too much of my like mental capacity to kind of think about. I do think about it, of course, but like I'm kind of in like autopilot mode where I'm like, okay, this connects to this connects to that. Which I'll still be explaining, of course, but that will be a bit of a faster process. Whereas this part is where a lot of my like brain power goes into, so it does take a bit longer. So thank you guys for being patient with me. I know this is probably like a more tedious part of watching in terms of an audience, but that's why I like hearing your guys' questions, because it keeps it interesting. So you don't just have to watch me fiddling with curves for like 3 hours. But it's here if you want to see it, you know. So I will play this now. It should all be in steps. If anything's in spline, I apologize. It shouldn't be, but I'll play it.
It'd be funny if we both got it wrong, eh? If I did the good thing and you did the bad one.
No. Wouldn't be funny at all.
It'd be funny if we both...
So there's definitely some spacing things that we need to refine. Some things are feeling a little too soft in places. Some things are feeling a little bit sharp in places, especially on the funny. It literally like snaps into funny. I need to just ease that out a little bit. But, you know, in terms of the head of the shot,
wrong, eh?
in terms of that part there, up to frame 57, I'm pretty happy.
It'd be funny if we both got it wrong, eh?
I may soften some bits.
It'd be funny if we both got it wrong, eh?
I'm not sure if I actually like the head sharp
It'd be funny if we both got it wrong.
there. I think he maybe should just feel kind of soft. He's still kind of internally thinking. So I might just soften that, which I may do outside a stream. I may do it inside a stream. Depends how much time I've got. I didn't actually touch any of this stuff since part 1 that we did because I've been so busy at work. But yes, we will continue. And I may tweak slightly what we've already done today in terms of refining. Something is just not feeling right for me. But it's good to be aware of these things, you know. We're not going to get it right first time. But I would say in terms of, I'm pretty happy. I'm quite satisfied with the amount of keys that I put in my early blocking to then spline bake and see what result we've got. There's nothing where something's feeling way too drifty or way too sharp. Nothing's like gimbling out of control, which sometimes happens. Depends on how you set up the rig and how efficient you are. But yeah, so nothing's going too crazy. There's no weird rotations that I've added. I mean, it's a very reserved shot generally, but sometimes it happens, you know? So I'm pretty happy with the spline bake in terms of nothing's going too funky. It's just now refining it is all we have to do, really. So yeah, thanks for joining the stream, guys, and hope you've learned something today. Thanks for all the questions, some great tips, some awesome stuff in there. Always a pleasure to have you guys along. I'll upload this to YouTube probably tomorrow, and then we'll do a part 3 very soon. We'll probably either next week or the following week. I'm trying to get it in at least once a week. Yeah, we'll see how things fly. Just keep in touch with my Twitter and my LinkedIn. I post when I'm going live on there. And then, yeah, hope to see you guys soon. Take care in the meantime, and happy animating.